Cougar Sports Saturday.
It's complete. Touchdown!
Cougar Sports Saturday. A presentation of KSL Sports.
Left wing for three. He got it again!
BYU Sports Talk by Cougar fans for Cougar fans. Here are your hosts, Mitch Harper and Matt Baiamonte. On Utah's legacy home of the Cougars. KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM and 1160 AM.
Good afternoon, Cougar Nation. Welcome on in to Cougar Sports Saturday here on the legacy home of the Cougars, KSL News Radio. It's the first Saturday in June 7th, and we're always, as usual, talking BYU sports here on KSL News Radio. Mitch Harper, Matt Baiamonte with you. We got a loaded show for you today, as we always do. Here on Cougar Sports Saturday, every single weekend, counting down to BYU football, 13 weeks or 12 weeks from today. BYU football will kick things off against the Portland State Vikings. We'll be talking about BYU football coming up a little bit later this hour as expectations are rolling out, preseason expectations. We got some recruiting insight. BYU's Director of Player Personnel, Justin Anderson, joins the show. And then also you'll hear from Brigham Young University President Shane Reese. You'll hear my conversation with the president of BYU here on the program as well. But, Matt, I think what we have to do is we got to start things off with some BYU hoops, as Cougar basketball always finds a way to get into the headlines.
The starting lineup. A look at the stories making headlines right now. It's time for the starting lineup on Cougar Sports Saturday.
That's right, Mitch. Adrian Wojnarowski, the Woj bombs of yesteryear. He's long retired from ESPN, so no Woj bombs. But to your point earlier, BYU continues to stay relevant nationally. It's kind of seemingly out of nowhere. Shams of ESPN tweets out earlier in the week on X that BYU basketball head coach Kevin Young had signed a multi-year extension. What do you make of this extension, Mitch, signed after one completed season from Kevin Young?
It's huge for BYU basketball to have Kevin Young locked in, and it's the right move by BYU to have Kevin Young signed to what they're calling a long-term extension. Now, it's been kind of strange at BYU as of late where with Kalani Sitake and Kevin Young, they're not announcing the length of time that the extension is taking place. That'll always happen in the past. That's not anything, BYU used to do that. Now they've kind of taken this page of, we're not going to disclose the year. We always know they're not going to disclose the financials. We understand that. That's BYU's private institution. But it is a little bit strange that they're not disclosing the year. Maybe it's because BYU football was such a big talking point about Kalani's contract that it created a little bit of uneasiness in the early years of his tenure. Maybe that's the page they're going. I don't understand why. Why not just say, hey, he's locked in for the next decade and make it clear to everyone that he is the head man at BYU basketball. But nonetheless, this is the right move because Kevin Young, had interest from the Phoenix Suns. Brian Santiago acknowledged as much, and BYU locks in their guy who I believe is someone that is really reinventing BYU basketball, but college basketball at large.
All good points, Mitch. And I think, too, the BYU side of things makes total sense. He had a phenomenal season. There were questions going into his debut campaign. How is Kevin Young going to adjust from the NBA game to the college game? How is he going to recruit? How is he going to be able to manage a roster and chemistry? These are all fair questions going into his first year. He, I think, outdid every expectation that anyone had from him, maybe even internally. For him to go to the Sweet 16 in his first year, to recruit at the level that he's been recruiting at from the second he took the job, that was all warranted. Where I think the biggest piece of the extension is, to me, this is Kevin Young acknowledging just as much as BYU that he is reaffirming his commitment to be at BYU for the long term. Because to your point, Doesn't take a rocket scientist to connect the dots between the Phoenix Suns opening and Kevin Young. And lo and behold, they ended up hiring an assistant from the Cleveland Cavaliers who is young and has a lot of similar traits to Kevin Young. So they were very clearly wanting to head in the direction that Kevin Young is at. And so for BYU to re-engage, that's maybe not the right term, but for BYU to get his commitment reestablished at BYU is a big deal. You don't sign this extension if you still are on the fence about wanting to be here at BYU. I truly believe that. He already had a long-term deal, Mitch. He didn't need the security of an extension on top of his original deal. To me, this is, I am recommitting to BYU. I am going to be here for a long time. And that's music to my ears, and I think the BYU fans' ears, because he's been a revelation for BYU basketball.
Kevin Young said, quote, "My family and I have loved our first year at BYU, being surrounded by great people at a great university with shared values. I'm excited to continue to build a program based on trying to help young men prepare for the NBA, win at the highest level, and do it at BYU. This is an exciting time for all of BYU athletics, with Brian Santiago recently being named athletic director. I look forward to continuing to work with Brian, and I'm excited to be in lockstep with his leadership," end quote. That was Kevin Young again after BYU formally announced publicly the long-term extension for head coach Kevin Young. And, you know, I was on an interview with the KSL Sports Zone's JJ and Alex, our sibling station, on 97.5 on Thursday, just moments after this extension was announced. And to me, it's just standard operating procedure. I believe when a BYU head coach has a big year that maybe was a little bit unexpected, when you're going to the Sweet 16, a place that BYU does not typically reside in, you give that man an extension. And Jeremiah Jensen kind of felt like maybe there was a case of leverage on the end of Kevin Young. To me, though, that's not the issue here. Yes, the Phoenix Suns could have been in the mix, and they were definitely interested. When you hear the reports of Devin Booker being part of this coaching search, clearly Devin Booker loved Kevin Young. He would have loved KYU to be back in the Valley. But the thing is that BYU has a very small coaching pool. You lose Kevin Young, and it would have been Chris Burgess, who we all like, and I think he would be a great future head coach, and he's learning now the ways of Kevin Young, and it's a great deal. But after that, then it's Mark Madsen. It's a big gap between Kevin Young and the next guy. So BYU has always got to make sure a guy like Kevin Young is happy, because I do believe that Kevin Young is reshaping the way college basketball is handled. You're seeing in this coaching carousel this season, Florida State goes out and hires an NBA young gun. Miami hires a prominent Duke assistant who's got, strong connections with developing players to the NBA. Utah hires a former NBA assistant. So many programs in college basketball are looking at BYU and going, how on earth did BYU rise up and become this national player in college basketball? And a lot of it is because of the vision of Kevin Young, and BYU has to keep that guy happy at all costs and make sure that he is taken care of, and it's worth every penny to invest in Kevin Young, because this guy's going to deliver big for BYU basketball. He already has, and he will continue going forward.
I think this extension also kind of quiets the fear about future NBA jobs. I just feel like, why would you sign two extensions, one extension, but the original contract, and then a year later an extension, if you're going to continually, maybe look at the NBA? And I'm not saying that he was necessarily looking at the NBA this time around. This was just, hey, Devin Booker, I love this guy. The Phoenix Suns, I know this organization. Of course, there's going to be some interest there. It'd be crazy if you didn't have that, but I don't think that's going to be happening every year. I think this extension signed by Kevin Young, to me, feels like we're ready to put roots down in Provo, Utah, which is incredibly exciting. And then, of course, Kevin Young, in talking with Jay Drew, acknowledges that he's having his fourth child before the start of next season. So there's just a lot of reason for Kevin Young to be here for a little bit. His kids are growing up. This is a great place to grow up. Utah's a great place to raise your kids. And now it's becoming a great place to play basketball and get ready for the NBA, which is big time. So this is huge. And for Brian Santiago to get him locked in for the long term, I think is a big deal. If Kevin Young doesn't believe in Brian, does he sign this extension? I think Kevin Young obviously believes in the vision of Brian Santiago, who played a huge role in getting Kevin here in the first place. So there's a great relationship between the AD and the men's basketball coach. You got to have a good sync between your head coaches and your AD to run a consistently successful program. And this is a step, I think, in building a long-term, just symbiotic vibe between the coaches and the administration. So there's nothing not to like about this, Mitch. This is great long-term. It's great short-term. And now I don't think we have to worry about what this is going to mean every single offseason for Kevin Young.
Yeah, BYU basketball, BYU football. Brian Santiago begins his tenure as athletic director with both the revenue-generating sport coaches locked into what BYU calls long-term extensions. Again, the details of Kevin Young's extension not released in terms of years and the financials. Now, his initial deal was believed to be 7 years, 6 years remaining. You could easily say maybe another 2, 3, 4 years, maybe tacked on, locks him in for a decade. Nonetheless, he's locked in with BYU, and that was task number one for Brian Santiago as AD, and he passes that with flying colors. We got to take a break, though. On the other side, we'll continue to talk more BYU basketball as the expectations for year 2 under Kevin Young continue to grow nationally. We'll hit on that next here on Cougar Sports Saturday.